We take this approach like the Autobahn. We have a shared responsibility model towards risk management, and we provide units with the road, the Autobahn. We provide them with a map, and this is our UA Secure program that we use for risk management. And we even have a number for roadside assistance, which is our consultation practice. But the destination, whether it's 800-171 or something else, that's up to the unit who owns the risk. And we are there to help them along the way. But how fast they get to their destination, that's up to them.
Welcome to the CMMC Proof podcast. I'm your host, Derek Phillips, a certified CMMC assessor. And I have a fellow certified CMMC professional and advanced practitioner, Wendy Epley, joining us today. How are you, Wendy?
I'm doing great, Derek. How are you?
Doing good. So you are a principal analyst at the University of Arizona. Sounds like a pretty
That is
fancy
me.
title. So what do you do in that role?
Well, a couple of different things. I lead the consultation practice for understanding information security in contracting. So if people engage with a vendor or they even have a click-through agreement, we want to make sure that the information security recommendations that the university requires, that we have those covered in the contract. And if they can't be covered in the contract for whatever reason, then we want to help them understand where they can implement certain mitigating practices to help them cover where those risks may be. And then one of the other things that I do for the university is working with the units or the different departments across campus to help them. If they need to meet a particular standard or framework, then I will work with them to help them understand what it means to implement those different objectives and practices so that they can meet compliance for those standards and frameworks.
Okay, awesome. You also are a certified export compliance professional. So I know you have extensive experience in export. Really excited to get into that as well. Before we deep dive into CMMC and export and all that fun stuff, what do you do outside of work for fun?
Well, I am a Florida girl living in an Arizona world, so I am a bit of a Disney enthusiast, but I will say that one of the things I really do love about Tucson is its dark skies. So I have picked up the hobby of astrophotography, and that started back in 2018 with the super blue blood moon phenomenon.
Okay.
And if I'm not out snapping pictures, I may be playing my flute or doing something that is creative. That could be cooking, arts and crafts, whatever. I also have 2 fur babies, and so I do like finding dog-friendly hiking paths when it's not too hot out, of course. So I do apologize in advance in case one of them barks, but at least you know what's happening.
First, I have a boxer.
I have a Cavalier King Charles and a purebred Jack Russell Terrier. So they're mostly quiet, but they get into little fits.
Now, I guess a good place to dive in and start is, how did you get into export control? Not the type of career field you hear every day that people work in, at least outside of higher ed.
Yeah, well, my mom and dad were both police officers. So I guess you can say I've always been involved in compliance in that regards. Career-wise, I would point it back to when I was working at Honeywell. And I had a great boss who created a position for me within the Engineering Test Services Division to be the export control liaison for the ETS division worldwide. And a little over 3 years later, the University of Miami hired me to be their first export compliance officer. Then about 3.5 years later, New York University poached me to be their first import and export compliance officer. But my husband, who is a desert rat, was uncomfortable being on the East Coast and said, and if an opportunity presents itself, can you get us back to my home state of Arizona? And wouldn't you know it, shortly after him saying that, the University of Arizona came calling. And so that's how we ended up in Tucson about 8 years ago. But getting involved into export compliance or compliance in general, it really happened serendipitously. And it was just one of those things where it started out and it just blossomed from there.
Also, yeah, sounds like in terms of getting back to Arizona, your husband manifested it.
It's all his fault.
I've had the pleasure of visiting the University of Arizona's campus. It's a beautiful campus. You could be worse places.
It could be.
At the University of Miami, you were their first export control officer. Is that right? Okay.
That's
So
correct.
we
Yeah.
know, fast forward to today, just about every university has export control officers. Why has that role become so critical for universities?
We do a lot of stuff. We are involved at universities, big or small. Of course, the bigger the university is, the more research that they're doing, the more important it becomes to have that export control officer on hand. And so, but the research is really what drives it. It's a lot of people think, oh, it's because of the number of foreign national students or faculty that are on hand or on campus. And while that's one aspect of it, it really is probably driven more by the research than it is the people.
Okay, got it. Now, at the University of Arizona, what type of research are you all doing that you would say is driving the requirement for export control requirements or even CMMC, those type of requirements?
The research itself, it's very broad. The University of Arizona is very much into space and science. I mentioned the astrophotography, so we have a lot of observatories in the Tucson area. But we
Okay.
also have research in optics and different engineering. We have a high-speed wind tunnel. We've got a thermal vacuum chamber in one of our buildings. So we're doing some unique and novel research that is happening, and it goes beyond just the basic fundamental where you're trying to expand on known theories. They're actually making things happen and helping organizations like the Raytheons or the small mom and pop companies, if you will, advance in their manufacturing of different technologies that are out there, or helping the government advance with different things that they are doing. So it's very broad. I wouldn't say that there's one particular thing that is driving the need for an export control officer or for why a university such as the University of Arizona would be doing CUI type research with 126 different categories of information that can be considered controlled unclassified information. You never know where it's going to take you.
Yeah, there's a lot of diversity within the research area.
Yeah.
What role does your team help with or supporting the researchers at University of Arizona with those compliance requirements, whether it's export controlled or this SB 800-171?
We serve the Information Security Office Governance, Risk, and Compliance Team. We say ISO GRC for short because it's such a mouthful. But we serve as advisors. We have another unit that manages the CUI enclave itself. And then we also have another unit, which is our export control office. And so between those two offices, they do the bulk of the heavy lifting, if you will, in helping to work with the units that are engaged with those research projects that involve export controls or involve CUI. And so we stand on the sidelines, if you will, and we help to advise where the different 110 practices in NIST 800-171, we can help advise in what that means and what are the different practices that are out there in order to implement the controls. But the decision of what practice or what control they're using is entirely up to the resource owner, or between our two units that pretty much handle CUI and export controls, for them to make that decision. We just serve as an advisor.
Okay. Have you seen at other universities where they've taken a different approach, and which have you seen work out better in terms of really helping those researchers understand the requirements and implement them properly?
I don't think there's necessarily a better approach because a lot of it really depends on the university itself, the institution itself. What is its culture? What is its size? What are its resources? How are they able to best manage compliance at their institution? So I don't think there's really a better approach, and there's certainly no one size fits all approach.
Right.
Everybody has to figure out what it is that's going to work best for them. I certainly think that the University of Central Florida has got a great program involved. They are an R2 institution, so they are not doing the same level of research like an R1, like the University of Arizona. But the person that leads up that program, she is a smart cookie. I think you would enjoy talking with her as well as a guest on your show. The University of Central Florida has got a great program, and I really like how they have centralized IT compliance. And so working with the offices like export compliance or privacy and other compliance partners at their institution to ensure that compliance can be achieved for CUI, I think has really made an impact on me in saying that I think this is something that should be adopted across every university if that's possible. But again, we don't want to get into that one size fits all approach because it may not work for every institution. But I'm certainly excited to try and explore that as something that maybe we could do at the University of Arizona. But that's above my bandwidth.
It's certainly a balancing act. And commonly, when I'm speaking to practitioners at universities, you don't hear the word centralized too often when it comes to research because y'all are so distributed. Elaborate more on why that is a beneficial for a university kind of centralizes IT compliance, and also touch on why it's so challenging though for universities, especially research universities like R1 research university.
I think I might switch that around a little bit and explain why it's been challenging. And I think historically, universities have been a decentralized structure. You have a College of Engineering, let's say, as an example, who starts to erect their own servers in order to do the things that they want to do. And then they end up finding that it's easier for them to just manage their IT services. And then another department gets wind, well, if engineering can do it, maybe I can do it. And next thing you know, you've got all these different siloed IT structures going on all over the campus. And there's no way to really manage who's doing what. And of course, what happens then too is you start to get protective of your baby, right? Like, this is the way it's always been done. Why would we go to centralization? But centralization, just like an organization, the Honeywells, the Shearing Plows, all other organizations, big and small, you realize that once you start centralizing, you can pull together now the resources and maximize the use of those resources across the entire campus. And that is what is currently happening at the University of Arizona. We are still in the beginning stages of centralization, but we are working to move towards that level of practice and help the researchers, the faculty, students, all have one central place to go where they can maximize the resources. Different units are not having the impact to budgets because they're paying for a software as a solution, a SaaS provider, their contract, and then across the street at another unit, they've got another contract with the same vendor for the same service, or maybe a slightly different variation of that service. So it does start to make things more economical when you look at centralization. And I think that's what's happening is that we've gone from this historic approach of this college opens up and they end up building their IT department, or the IT department at the time couldn't support what it was that the other college or school wanted to do. And I think we're at a different point now, especially as cybersecurity, the threats to cybersecurity, the threats to networks, the threats that come in from using more managed services, right? That we need to find a way to centralize everything and have a better view on those things so that we can manage them better.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned University of Arizona, you all are currently underway with moving towards that model and maturing it. And I know that's
Yeah,
no small undertaking.
that's an
What are
understatement.
right, especially within a university, any organization, but especially a university. Now, the ways you all found it, it's been where researchers have been receptive for that model, and then what are some challenges you have encountered along the way to hopefully help other universities who are listening and say, we want to centralize our IT compliance as well. What advice can you give them?
I think we're very much in the infancy stage of all of this. I think the key though is listening to your constituents, having that line of communication be two-way. Nobody has the answer of how this is going to look. And there are great ideas that will come from surprising places. And so I think it's very good that we keep communication open. And I'm happy to say that that is what I've seen at the University of Arizona so far in our infancy is, yes, there are decisions that are being made behind closed doors by those who have the bandwidth to be making those decisions. But at the same time, there are still forums that are out there that are allowing those involved in the IT centralization process to share thoughts and ideas and experiences and, hey, have we considered XYZ? And I think that is going to make a big difference in the success of centralization is because we are keeping that line of communication flowing in both directions.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that's one of the unique aspects of higher ed. You all are very collaborative and sharing and just willing to help each other out. And I love that you said that great ideas can come from really surprising places. So whether it's students, professors, whoever the constituents are, you just never know who has a unique idea, a different way of doing something that would be more effective.
Exactly. Keeping that open mind of
Right.
how there's a goal of reducing costs, maximizing resources, but at the same time, there are people who have been doing their role for decades,
Right.
and it's good to listen to them and understand what makes their area so important and how is all this change impacting them. But at the same time, while change is hard, we want those same individuals who have been doing their job for decades on end to be open to those changes and realize that we can't stay in that little bubble of the way things have been done.
Right, absolutely. I had the opportunity to watch a webinar from one of the, I believe it was Summit 7 conference that you did like a panel of higher ed.
Yeah.
Really insightful. And I was just blown away by some of the creative ideas you all had in terms of simplifying and streamlining CMMC, several ones that you had mentioned. Can you talk more to some of the creative approaches you all have taken to just tackle the CMMC and SSP 171 compliance requirements?
One of the, I think, more creative things we've done, there was a couple things we did. A few years ago, I created a resource that we called the University Security Model. And the university's information security governance is based off of NIST Special Publication 853. And what we did is the University Security Model took 853 and we showed what this control is about. Then we identified questions that will help the resource owner analyze whether or not this control is implemented within their resource. And if it's not implemented, then we show what the effects could be for not having it implemented. And then we also provide them some questions on how they might mitigate risks that they could be carrying for that control. We also showed how that control then was aligned with information security policies and standards and guidelines and procedures. So we had all that mapped. Then we also showed for this same one control how it might also align with NIST 800-171 or with the Higher Education Community Vendor Assessment Toolkit questionnaire. So we had something that was pretty comprehensive for all of these controls in 53. And now that is evolving, and we have received the green light from our Chief Information Officer to develop a program which I call Cyborg, which stands for Cybersecurity Body of Risk Guardians. And so this community of practice, if you will be working more off of the baseline of 800-171, still utilizing some of that structure that we built from the university security model, but now bringing in more of a maturity in helping units understand how to scope better and audit their practices and look for those mitigating controls that would come along with implementing those same controls that you would find in 800-171. While advantageous to have a CMMC level 2 goal for the entire university, it's probably not practical, but at the same time, you can certainly just mark those controls that would not be applicable, say, to the College of Psychology, who may not be working with CUI, where they can say, okay, this is not applicable, but still work towards all the others. And so that's what we're looking to achieve with Cyborg, is bringing in this community of practice where no matter what their unit is, no matter what their mission is, or the type of research that they're doing, or the programs that they're teaching, they're going to be able to all be able to assess and understand in a more cohesive way how to align with IT practices of 800-171.
Oh, that's pretty awesome. That's so important, because we just have, if you just tell a stakeholder, read 853 or 800-171 and figure it out, you might as well just it's in a foreign language and they don't understand it. What are they going to do with it? It's useless at that point. But the way you're breaking it down and giving examples and putting it into context for them, where it's basically in plain English, I think that really is the secret sauce, because within compliance, everyone's looking for the easy button to just get it done and over with. But we know that doesn't exist. But that, to me, that is a version of making it easier, where if people can understand it first, that's the first step, understand what's required. So what's been that reception, and then what impact have you seen by taking that approach?
It's actually been very good so far. We have a few key stakeholders that have gotten involved in Cyborg and kind of being my guinea pigs, if you will, with how we're doing this. But they are also the same ones that are involved in some CUI type activities. They are involved in export control activities. And what they really appreciate is the way that I can kind of be a translator for them. And so even though I am not advising on export controls, it's like being that translator that can say to them, well, this is what the export control office is explaining. Right. And so what this means is we have to do X, Y, Z in order to meet this compliance. And that is what they're appreciative of, is understanding how do we understand these two worlds that have worked so independently for so long that we are now seeing the convergence of. And so now they just need an interpreter. It's like going to a foreign country, right? You either need that, English to German translator book or something. And so I'm there and I can act as that translator for them and helping them to understand how to make the sense of both of these worlds so that everybody, all the compliance partners are happy, the IT people are happy, and we're achieving a more robust, more mature compliance structure. And that ultimately is the goal, right? We don't want to say, no, you can't do this. That has never been part of my repertoire. Even when I was an export control officer, it was not about saying no. It was about, how do we make it work? Here are the guardrails of what we have to work in. So how do we do this and not go outside of those guardrails that we need to drive within? That's kind of how the Information Security Office works, is we take this approach like the Autobahn. We have a very much a shared responsibility model towards risk management, and we use a program that is now a SaaS provided solution that was originally developed in-house. We provide units with the road, the Autobahn. We provide them with a map, and this is our UA Secure program that we use for risk management. And we even have a number for roadside assistance, which is our consultation practice. But the destination, whether it's 800-171 or something else, that's up to the unit who owns the risk. And we are there to help them along the way. But how fast they get to their destination, that's up to them.
And as someone who has lived in Europe and driven on the Autobahn, that analogy speaks to me. And it just comes back to that, simplifying it as much as possible, putting it into terms or metaphors, analogies that people can understand, because otherwise, like say, you need that translator because it's speaking a different language. And it's so important for IT and compliance professionals to understand that. Typically, in this context, the researchers, they don't speak that same language. So if you're coming to them just talking about the controls, that means nothing to them. That's gibberish.
It doesn't, as an export compliance professional or as an information security professional, we understand what we understand. We've been trained in that. Our faculty and staff haven't.
Right.
So it's up to us. We can regurgitate the regulations or whatever a standard may say until we're blue in the face. But if we can't explain to them how this applies to them and what they need to do in a way that makes sense for them, then they're not going to do what needs to be done, because they're going to go, this is too complicated. So we have to, so as professionals, we have to be better in being able to explain, just like we want the researchers to explain to us their research in layman's terms, we need to be able to explain compliance to them in layman's terms. We can't expect them to be the professionals. That's what we're for. So finding the ways to make it simple, break it down for them in a way that they can understand, and then they can take it back and go, oh, well, that's not so bad. We don't want to overwhelm them with too much. Often I will say, let's take it one little bit at a time. Let's work on this one little bit. Once that's done, let's work on the next bit. We've got a plan. I'm going to hold your hand through it, right? So you're not alone. You're not being expected to take this big bucket of stuff and go figure it out. We're going to help you through it. And I think that makes the biggest difference in how, at least at the University of Arizona, how I am working with my constituents in helping them to achieve compliance is letting them know they're not alone and that we're working together as a team.
That's fantastic. And I know a confused mind does not take action. So we want to avoid that confusion and ambiguity. And it's good to know, I'm sure, for your constituents at the University of Arizona, that roadside assistance is there, is available whenever they need it.
That's right. We're not AAA, we're ISO.
Yes, indeed. So that's awesome. Now, also, we know within the context of NIST-SP 800-171 that the documentation, CUI Enclave, which you mentioned earlier, SSP, those are really challenging components of the compliance requirements. Or what are some other creative ways that you all are approaching those components?
I think our UA Secure program is probably the one way that we have really been able to help guide our units in developing their system security plans or their security plans for their information resource. So whether it's a laptop computer, it's an entire enclave, we are able to use that system, and as I mentioned, it's currently a SaaS solution now, even though it was developed in-house. And we take this shared responsibility model to help them walk through whether it is a generalized questionnaire that I've created for them to answer questions and be able to assess compliance towards university policy, ISO policy, or if they want to take a more advanced view, then we can select for them, or they can select what we call a baseline. And that baseline might be 800-171. And then they can work through each of the practices, each of the controls within 800-171 to measure where they're at with compliance. Now, the SaaS solution currently does not provide them with higher performance risk system score, but I have created a spreadsheet that is available to my cyborgs that they can actually use as a worksheet, and it will calculate through Boolean algebra. It will calculate that SPUR score for them. So we have resources internally, the things that will help them, whether it's the workbook, it's the Excel spreadsheet that lists out all 320 practices and then weighs it out for them. We're doing the things that are within our control to help get units as secure as possible to meet their objectives and their goals, at the same time keeping all of that contained within UA Secure, our risk management software, so that every year they go in, they update as they make changes, as they remediate deficiencies. All of this is managed within UA Secure, and they can then look at their progress and see where they need to continue to work on deficiencies, or even where there might be some opportunities for maturity. And that is our goal, right? That's what CMMC is about. That's the first M in CMMC is maturity. And so that is something that I think a lot of people tend to forget is, yeah, we want to get to those 110 objectives, but we also want them to be working on strengthening and building the maturity. One of the things that I'd like to see that I think we might be able to achieve with Cyborg, but I'm not sure yet. Well, this is just a very raw thought, is in 853, we have PM25 is where it's at, but it's data governance body. That practice demonstrates maturity because it can be aligned with other objectives in 800-171, such as the insider threat training, or 3.6.2, I think is where it is, where you track and you document and you report incidents to a designated official within the organization. So that data governance body then can be those designated officials. Like, yeah, that's something that can help along the way too. So even though you're not staying in 800-171, you are still looking at some of those other controls like 853 that 800-171 maps up into, and bringing those in, and those can help mature your program as well. So yeah, you can have your perfect 110 score, but maturity is going to be key, especially as your 3 years pass for your next audit.
Yeah, certainly. I like how seeing a theme that you all think outside the box of how to achieve the requirements, confined to doing it the way that it's always been done, or people say you have to do it, but you're really thinking, okay, how can we simplify this and help?
Yeah, and I think using the SaaS solution has been great too. We're not death by spreadsheet, and we are finding a very consistent way to approach risk management by utilization of this SaaS solution, so that we can have a consistent metric in how we measure where compliance is at. And it can be used by anybody. Nobody has to be an IT professional. Nobody has to be an export compliance professional. Anybody at the university can use the program. You have your risk management team that comes together. You identify the resource that you're going to assess against, and then you start working through the questionnaire or through the objectives, depending on which view you go. And
Okay.
I like that program a lot.
Awesome. Now I know you mentioned it's called Cyborg, all right?
Cyborg, yeah. Cybersecurity Body of Risk Guardians.
All right. Now you said it was initially developed in-house at the University of Arizona. That's a SaaS solution. Does that mean it's in the marketplace or it's still just internal to?
So we've got two things crossed there. Cyborg
Okay.
is an internal program that I have developed to handhold people throughout the university in meeting compliance.
Okay.
UA Secure is the name that we've given the SaaS solution,
Oh,
and the SaaS solution is commercially available through a company called Sybilsoft. And Sybilsoft has that IP that they had, this individual created in-house originally for the university, and then she went off. And we love that about great ideas that come about at the university, is that the university does support the evolution of that into a commercial product. And so that's what she's done there. And so I do encourage that if people are looking for a risk management solution, Sybilsoft does provide that. It's different from a GRC. It's not a GRC product. It is not about maintaining your SPUR score in there. It is about compliance. It's about achieving that risk management for your program and looking at it holistically, that the responsibilities are not falling to one department or one division. You're able to take that entire organization and work together in order to have greater visibility to the risks and then work to mitigate those risks.
Okay. Wow. That's awesome. Now you have achieved, I mentioned the CMMC the certified CMMC professional and advanced registered practitioner designation. How has that benefited you as a IT compliance professional in higher ed?
It certainly opened up more doors for me within the university. I have our two offices that manage CUI for the university. I mentioned before, it's a unit within IT that manages the hardware, the CUI enclave itself. And then we have the export control office. And so those two offices will look to me for guidance and direction with 800-171, especially as being the only person at the university who holds these designations and certifications. So it's nice for them having the inside scoop, if you will, on how the government is looking at compliance for CMMC. The other thing too is because of those certifications, there are other standards and frameworks that are coming about, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. And so bringing in that knowledge of CMMC and the training that I've received of understanding how information security for controlled unclassified information needs to be achieved, we're able to now apply that into this Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and getting things organized and structured to manage with those standards and frameworks. We also have infrastructure as a service resources at the university that are provided to government, that are provided to other universities. So that infrastructure as a service solution is looking to get FedRAMP certified. And now we're taking, again, they're looking to me to help guide them through that process of what is this going to be involved, or what does this kind of mean? Now, I've never advised on FedRAMP before. This is new for me, but certainly having that training with CMMC has allowed me to understand the concepts and the intent behind FedRAMP. And now it's just a matter of learning the language for FedRAMP. And then also HITRUST. HITRUST is a new area. So there's more and more IT compliance type of elements that are coming along. And it all started from just one little area of compliance, and it's now blossoming.
Yes, a ripple effect. That's exciting. A lot of opportunities. So it sounds like you would recommend your other colleagues in compliance in higher ed to get those designations and certifications as well?
Yeah, I think knowledge is power. My boss had phrased it something similar about Wendy's one of those people that likes to read until her eyes bleed. And I started cracking up because I actually do keep eye drops on my desk.
Prepared.
But I am prepared. I do enjoy reading about regulations and reading about how things are changing. I do tend to take a neutral approach to when these things are happening because there's only so many things you can control, and what the government is going to do is what the government is going to do. So I think just reading and understanding and being prepared for what they're planning and what's going to be asked of us is the best way that I can look to being involved with these regulatory changes that go on down the line. Now, does that mean that I don't get involved in public comments? No, I do. I get involved in it, but I take it more from an approach of what is and is not making sense that we need more clarification on, right? Or where does it create a potential conflict? And so that's what I try to look at when we do make potential comments, is the things that they've written, where it doesn't make sense, and how can you make it better for us? So help us help you.
Right. Now, in terms of cybersecurity and privacy regulations that impact higher ed, what resources do you rely on to stay up to date on what's going on?
Anything I can get my hands on, really. They come from so many sources. I would say that the Federal Register is definitely my primary go-to to make sure that I stay on top of regulations, laws, government-wide policies that are being published through those official channels. Federal Register is a big one. I also stay on top of NIST. I subscribe, so I'm constantly getting those emails so that I don't have to try and make the time to go out and search for it. Just let it come to my inbox. But the National Institute of Standards and Technology, that's another big one as well. For internally, we have the Regulated Research Community of Practice, and that is invaluable because we have like-minded professionals across universities throughout the United States who are part of this community, who are sharing insight, they're asking questions, they're getting answers, and we're coming together as a community to build and share the knowledge and exchange ideas, maybe even develop a resource or two that we can start to utilize among us that will help us in our roles. And RCOP, as well as the EDUCAUSE 800-171 Compliance Community Group, those have been great resources as well to have in my arsenal of staying on top of things. And I certainly couldn't know a lot of the things that I know, or have gotten some of the ideas that I've gotten without having that great community of peers helping to share knowledge and share the interests and the things that they're facing. It really does take a community, I think, to make all of this work.
Absolutely. This is a team sport when it comes to compliance. And I couldn't agree more in terms of RCOP and EDUCAUSE are invaluable resources. That's how I found you, through RCOP. And I certainly try to attend RCOP webinars and just keep a pulse of what's going on in the research community, because you all are very open and sharing.
I do try to stay on top of things happening globally, and that's where I am involved in the International Sanctions and Export Control Society, and that takes a very global approach to export controls and understanding how those different things are impacting not just in the United States, but around the world. And when we think about the footprint that many universities have, we certainly need to step outside our US bubble and make sure that we understand how the activities with our researchers who are traveling abroad or working with people abroad, how the different regulations and laws are impacting those countries, and those countries' laws and regulations are impacting the United States. And so it's important to stay on top of that too.
Awesome. For universities that are really early in the early stages of their CMMC journey, where would you recommend for them to start? What's the best place just to get started?
The best place to get started, if they know nothing at all whatsoever, they have no background, they're staring at the 5-inch binder of practices of 800-171, I would say close that binder, go to the Cyber AB marketplace and look up a registered practitioner organization and hire a registered practitioner advanced to help consult with you and advise you in what it's going to take. If you sit there taking it all on your own, you can do it, but you might find yourself very frustrated and you might find yourself going down a rabbit hole that you don't need to go. So why do that to yourself, especially with rulemaking being finalized so close? We are so close to the finish line. There really is no time to now start looking at everything. Bring in the professionals, bring in the people who have been trained that can help you, guide you, advise you, and get you to where you need to be in order to be ready for CMMC. If you have been stabbing your way through this for a while now, you might be at the point where you are ready for maybe a gap analysis. Somebody who can look at what you've been doing objectively and can give you the inside scoop of what it is that they're seeing or not seeing. And in that case, again, go out to the Cyber AB marketplace, look for those who are authorized to be able to advise and give you that gap analysis that you are looking for and understand exactly where you sit with getting things done. I know that there is a big price tag that a lot of people are talking about with this, but you've probably heard the expression, you can't make money unless you spend money. Well, that's the same thing here. You're not going to get those contracts with the Department of Defense unless you've got the certification. The money that you're going to spend to get the consultations, to get the CMMC certification, all of that is going to come back to you tenfold probably with being certified so that you can get and be in a more favorable position to get those DoD contracts. And we know that those DoD contracts are very lucrative or can be lucrative. It's going to take a little bit of money. I'm not going to skirt around that, but there are people that are out there that are not looking to take advantage of organizations or universities. They are generally wanting to help them. But this is no small feat to get through 320 practices, to collect 640 pieces of evidence at a minimum. It is very, very time consuming, and you have to expect that you're going to have to pay for that kind of service. But you also have the option to try and do it yourself. Just not going to have the guarantees as if you've got somebody trained in your corner to help you out.
Yes, and we think about CMMC level 2 once it is the final rule and those assessments. I know Stacey Bosch-Janik, she always says that those are going to be high stake assessments where it can be millions of dollars on the line for getting that certification. So that's not something you really want to leave to chance, because the consequences can be dire. And to your point, it's not necessarily a do-it-yourself, especially if you don't have the expertise, because there's so many nuances, so many unknown, unwritten rules. You're going to likely miss something if you don't have that expertise guiding you through the process.
Yeah, especially as now we've got the FAR CUI rule that is gaining momentum again. This isn't just about the DoD, right? This is going to impact any federal contract that you have or that you want to have. Get the experts, get them in your corner, and don't look at this as a one-time expense either. For CMMC is going to require recertification for level 2 and level 3 every 3 years, right? But your level 1 every year. And even still, the way that things have been written, even if you are getting your level 2 certification every 3 years, you're still going to have to attest every year. So why not get the professionals in your corner as a vendor as a partner in your CMMC compliance journey and helping you through all of this, especially as everything is new and we're still trying to figure it out. Again, you can do it on your own, but why would you? Especially if you've got people who can make it so much easier for you.
Yeah. Oh, sometimes, especially if you don't know what you're doing, it can cost you more money by doing it on your own.
Yeah, when we think about compliance, it's about conforming to a rule. And the processes and the strategies for regulatory compliance provide that guidance. Or they might provide you with the guardrails, like our Audubon analogy, right? And
Right.
that's what helps universities and organizations attain their goals. So if you don't follow the rules or you go past the guardrails, then you've got those repercussions that you're going to have to deal with. And some of them may not be very happy, especially if you start facing a False Claims Act or who knows, what other criminal or civil repercussions could be out there, not to mention reputational damage. And that can even be more damaging than a lawsuit of some sort.
Absolutely. Now, when you mentioned False Claims Act, and we know with some of those high profile cases like Penn State and Georgia Tech, where whistleblowers have essentially filed a complaint saying that those research universities were not compliant with NIST SB 800-171. What impact are you seeing that having within higher ed?
Nobody wants to see these kinds of headlines in the newspaper, right? We love our peer institutions. We want only the best for them. At least that's how I feel. But the thing is that somebody's got to be the poster child, right? Somebody's got to be the example of what not to do. And these cases are helping to support having the discussions with executive leadership, with senior leadership about how we achieve compliance and why it's so important. And I think that is the type of dialogue or the impact that those kinds of cases are having at other institutions is, look, see, this is what happened. And those are all unique cases unto themselves. This isn't a cookie cutter kind of thing that was happening. Each of them had their own situations, and they're unfortunate, but they are allowing us to have those conversations with senior leadership, with executive leadership on the importance of compliance, how much of an impact this would have at the institution if things are not done right. And so I think that's been the good thing that's come out of the bad situation.
Absolutely. And like the saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste, because it's essentially you can help change behavior and get attention of, like, say, senior leaders to know that, okay, plausible deniability is not going to be a defense when it comes to compliance.
No, not at all. My dad used to always say, "Out of bad comes good," was his thing, and it's true. Yeah, we may have this bad situation, but how are we learning from those mistakes, even if they're not our mistakes, right? How are we learning from somebody else's mistakes to ensure that we don't go down that same path or end up on the front page of a newspaper? And I know in my business classes in college, that was one of the big things that always impacted me was if the things that you do, how would you feel if they ended up on the front page of a newspaper? Are you going to be happy about it? Are you going to be embarrassed by it? And then think about the repercussions that they have. Every action has a reaction, right? And so we want to be sure that we are making good decisions. We're making honest and truthful statements, and that if we do make a mistake, own up to it. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. It's better to own up to it than to try and hide it or pretend it doesn't happen. Don't stick your head in the sand like the ostrich and pretend that, it's just not there. We've got to deal with them. And I think if we can step up to the plate, learn from those mistakes, grow from those mistakes, and pull those resources from community peers like Regulated Research Community of Practice or International Sanctions and Export Control Society, whatever the resource is, use those to help you be better. And I think that is the ultimate goal, especially with what we're seeing with the Cyber Incident Reporting for Critical Infrastructure Act. That's the goal, is how do we be better, but how do we work together as a community to be better, to be safer? And I think we want to take that approach with all things compliance.
Absolutely. And it's a reminder to just the defense industrial base that CMMC is a program to assess the existing requirements. So D4R 7012 is existing. And so we know so many, at least I know so many defense contractors just sitting on the lines waiting to get started until CMMC is final. But yeah, those clauses are in your contract. This is a reminder.
Yeah, and they've been around since 2017. This isn't anything new. This really isn't. And so anybody who has been sitting there going, well, I'm just going to wait for rulemaking to happen, it's almost like the ostrich in the sand, right? Well, if I just stick my head in, maybe it'll pass over. But the thing is it's been around. It's been around for a while. It's just been maturing and evolving. And I think as the FAR CUI rule is showing us, is that CMMC is just one small piece of it. CMMC has trailblazed with everything, and they are certainly creating the model that other agencies are following. But this isn't something that's going away.
Yep. And a good example of that, think about FedRAMP. A lot of states have followed that model with state ramp. I foresee certainly CMMC being similar, but certainly, Wendy, it's been a fantastic conversation. I could talk to you about compliance for hours and hours and hours. But as we wrap up this interview, I always like to ask my guests, what is a book, movie, or podcast that has had a profound effect on or impact on your personal or professional career? Book, movie, or podcast, or even a mentor.
That's you, Derek. That's you. Well, I think the one that always sticks out in my mind is when I was starting in my bachelor degree. I had to read a book and write a paper on that book for my poli-sci class. And most of my classmates went for those shorter books, but my professor was keen on a Pulitzer Prize winner, David Halberstam's The Best and the Brightest. And I picked it thinking, well, it's just going to earn me extra brownie points with my professor and maybe get a little bit better grade. But I quickly found that I was not able to put that book down, even after the assignment was over. Now, the backdrop of this book is around America's involvement in the Vietnam War. But Halberstam showed that not only were the best and the brightest some of the most intelligent, well-connected, and self-confident individuals at that time who shaped the U.S.'s effort in the Vietnam War, they were also the same ones who were responsible for its failure of the U.S. Vietnam policy. Now, I read that book 20 years ago, so it's obviously had an impact. But I think understanding that while you can be highly intelligent and influential, you're also fallible. And we are only human. We are imperfect and we will make mistakes, but how we grow and mature from those mistakes is what I think can set us apart.
Wow, that's awesome. Let me see if I can find that book. It sounds interesting.
It's a great book.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Really appreciate you being generous with your time and sharing valuable wisdom with the CMMC Proof listeners, watchers, whatever platform they're listening to us on. But yeah, really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
If you receive value from this episode, I invite you to subscribe and like so that you're the first to know when we release new episodes. Also, check out CMMCproof.com to learn more about the arsenal of resources that we provide to equip you to conquer CMMC. We'll see you next time.